Arrest him. Claire Whitmore's voice cut through the midnight quiet of Whitmore Dynamics. Calm enough to sound almost casual, but every security officer in the marble lobby moved the moment she spoke. Ethan Walker stood 20 feet from the restricted north corridor, his faded work jacket unzipped, an old manila envelope tucked beneath one arm, and a temporary visitor badge hanging crooked against his shirt. He did not run. He did not argue. He simply looked at Claire with the steady expression of a man who understood that dignity sometimes meant remaining quiet when everyone else had already decided who you were. "Ma'am, step away from him," the security chief said. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan replied. "Then explain why you were inside a restricted technical area after business hours," Claire demanded. Her heels clicked once against the polished floor as she approached. At 36, Claire had spent years learning how to control rooms filled with people twice her age and 10 times more certain they belonged there. Tonight was supposed to be no different. "Before you arrest me," Ethan said quietly, "check the north server room." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." "Check it." 3 short words. No fear. No arrogance. That bothered her more than an excuse would have. Behind the glass walls, the building glowed in cold blue light, almost empty except for overnight staff and the soft hum of ventilation. Outside, rain streaked the windows overlooking downtown Chicago, turning the city lights into blurred ribbons of gold. Ethan could hear the faint electronic buzz coming from somewhere beyond the corridor. He had heard earlier, too. That was why he had crossed the security door. That was why he was standing here now. Claire glanced toward her security chief. Was he authorized? No. Did he have clearance? No. Then call the police. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, not in defeat, but calculation. "Ms. Whitmore, you have about 3 minutes before this becomes a much bigger problem." Claire gave a humorless smile. "You trespassed inside my company, and now you're threatening me?" "I'm warning you." "About what?" Ethan looked toward the north corridor. "Something your people should have noticed an hour ago." Silence settled between them. Claire studied his worn boots, inexpensive jacket, tired eyes. Nothing about him suggested corporate espionage. Nothing suggested he belonged anywhere near the protected infrastructure of a multi-billion-dollar technology company. Yet somehow he had walked directly toward one of the most sensitive rooms in the building. Minutes later, 2 Chicago police officers arrived. Ethan offered his hands without resistance. "Mr. Walker," one officer said, "you'll need to come with us while this gets sorted out." Ethan nodded. Claire expected anger. Instead, he turned toward her. "Please check that room." "We will," she said, "after security determines what you were doing inside it." Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear, disappointment. By then you may be asking the wrong question. As the officers escorted him toward the entrance, a sharp electronic tone suddenly echoed through the lobby. Claire froze. A second tone followed, then another. Across the security desk, 3 monitors changed from green to amber. The security chief stared at his screen. "Ms. Whitmore," Claire turned. "What?" "We're getting a systems alert." "Where?" His fingers moved across the keyboard. His face slowly lost its color. "North server room." Ethan stopped beside the glass doors. Rain shimmered beyond him, and for the first time that night, Claire looked at the quiet single father not as an intruder, but as a question she could no longer answer. Then the security chief whispered something that made the entire lobby go still. "Whatever he did in there," he said, "it may have just saved the system." 3 hours earlier, Ethan Walker had entered Whitmore Dynamics for a reason that had nothing to do with trespassing. The late afternoon sun had already disappeared behind Chicago's steel and glass skyline when he stepped through the revolving doors, carrying the same worn manila envelope Claire would later notice beneath his arm. He had come straight from a 12-hour maintenance shift across town, and everything about him seemed ordinary. Faded jeans, scuffed brown boots, a charcoal work jacket, and the tired eyes of a 41-year-old father calculating how quickly he could finish one uncomfortable errand and get home. His daughter Sophie was spending the evening with their neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, but Ethan had promised he would pick her up before 9. He did not break promises to Sophie. Not after losing her mother. Not after becoming the one person she expected to remain when everything else in their lives had changed. At the reception desk, a young woman offered him a professional smile. "Can I help you? I need 5 minutes with Daniel Mercer." Her fingers stopped above the keyboard. "Mr. Mercer is a board member." "I know. Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then I'm afraid I can't send you upstairs." Ethan placed the envelope gently on the marble counter. "Tell him Ethan Walker is here. That should be enough." The receptionist searched his name, frowned, then tried again. "I don't have you in our system." "You wouldn't." Before she could answer, the executive elevators opened. Claire Whitmore emerged with two senior managers beside her, moving quickly while discussing the next morning's board meeting. Ethan recognized her immediately. Claire noticed him only because he was the one person in the lobby who looked as though he did not belong there. Their eyes met. "Problem?" Claire asked the receptionist. "This gentleman wants to see Mr. Mercer without an appointment." Claire looked at Ethan. "Business matter?" "Personal." "Then schedule it through his office." "I tried, and nobody returned my calls." Claire checked her watch. "There's probably a reason." Ethan absorbed the remark without reacting. Probably. Something about his calmness irritated her. "Mr. Mercer isn't available. 5 minutes is all I need." "Not tonight." Ethan glanced at the envelope, then back at Claire. "Some things shouldn't wait another day." Claire's expression hardened. "Security can show you out." Ethan picked up the envelope. "That won't be necessary." He turned away without protest, and Claire continued toward the elevators, already forgetting him. Ethan made it halfway across the lobby before he stopped. Beneath the soft buzz of fluorescent lighting came another sound, almost hidden inside the building's mechanical hum. Click. Pause. Click, click. Ethan slowly turned toward the north corridor. Then came the smell, faint but unmistakable, heated insulation. He looked toward reception. Nobody reacted. A maintenance cart stood beside a service door that had failed to latch completely. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. He should have left. Sophie was waiting. This company was no longer his concern. Yet some instincts survived every attempt to bury them. He walked toward the door. "Sir," the receptionist called. "That area is restricted." Ethan stopped with his hand inches from the frame. The clicking came again, faster now. His face changed. "Call building engineering." "Sir, you need to leave." "Call them now." She reached for security instead. Ethan pushed through the service door. The smell strengthened immediately. 20 yards ahead, warning lights blinked behind a secured glass partition marked North Infrastructure. Ethan approached, studying the control panel through the glass. For the first time all evening, genuine concern entered his eyes. He whispered 4 words to himself, words no ordinary visitor should have known. They never replaced it. Then he reached for the emergency access panel. The emergency access panel should have required a security code, but Ethan did not touch the keypad. He crouched beside it and studied the narrow diagnostic window instead, listening to the uneven clicking behind the wall. "Come on," he whispered. "Give me one clean cycle." The indicator flashed green, amber, green, then held amber half a second too long. Ethan closed his eyes. He knew that pattern. He had known it years before most of the employees in this building had ever heard the name Whitmore Dynamics. "Sir, step away from that door." A security officer hurried down the corridor, followed by the receptionist. Ethan remained still. "Call engineering," he said. "I already told you. Security is here." "That isn't what I asked." The officer moved closer. "You're in a restricted area, and you have a thermal protection relay failing behind that wall." The officer stared at him. "A what?" Ethan pointed toward the blinking indicator. "Your backup cooling circuit is cycling against a false safe reading. If the primary load transfers, the system will think that room is cooler than it is." "How would you know that?" Ethan looked through the glass. "Because I recognized the sequence." Footsteps clicked sharply behind them. Claire Whitmore had returned, accompanied by her security chief. Her expression changed the instant she saw Ethan. "You." Ethan stood. "Ms. Whitmore, get your building engineer down here." "You were told to leave." "I was." "Instead, you entered a secured corridor." "Yes." "Why?" Ethan pointed toward the warning panel. "Because something is wrong." Claire barely glanced at it. You expect me to believe you wandered into one of our most sensitive technical areas because you heard a noise? I smelled heated insulation first. That makes this worse, not better. Claire, the security chief, said carefully, we should probably clear the corridor. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. If you shut the wrong circuit down, the backup will take the full load. Claire folded her arms. And somehow you know our infrastructure better than my own security team? Right now, yes. The answer came without pride. That was what unsettled her. Who are you? She asked. Ethan looked at the manila envelope beneath his arm. Someone trying to go home to his daughter. Then the clicking accelerated. Ethan turned immediately. There, an amber light became red. He opened the emergency cover and reached for the manual isolation control. Don't touch that, Claire ordered. If I don't, your automatic transfer engages. Security? 30 seconds, Ethan said. Give me 30 seconds. Claire hesitated. Ethan watched the sequence like a musician, counting beats only he could hear. 3 green flashes. 1 amber. A pause. Now. He turned the isolation switch. The clicking stopped. The corridor became strangely quiet. A few seconds later, the warning light returned to green. Ethan exhaled. Call engineering now. Claire stared at the panel, then at him. You just manipulated protected company equipment without authorization. I prevented the backup from taking the load. You don't know that. Your engineers will. Her jaw tightened. Security, escort him upstairs while we verify this. Ethan picked up his envelope. You're making a mistake. Then you'll have an opportunity to explain it. As they started back toward the lobby, the building engineer finally appeared, breathless, tablet in hand. Ms. Whitmore, wait. Claire turned. The engineer stared at Ethan as if seeing something impossible. Who told him about the old Whitmore relay sequence? Claire frowned. What old sequence? The engineer swallowed. The one he just interrupted. It hasn't been in our training manuals for 15 years. Ethan said nothing. Claire slowly looked at the envelope under his arm. And for the first time, she wondered whether the stranger she was about to have removed knew something about her company that even she had never been told. The building engineer's question should have stopped everything. But Claire Whitmore had spent too many years protecting a company worth billions to let one unexplained detail overrule procedure. We'll discuss the relay later, she said. Right now, Mr. Walker entered a restricted area without authorization. Ethan met her eyes. Your system is stable. That's what matters. That isn't your decision. No, he said quietly. Apparently, it isn't anymore. Claire caught the strange weight in those final words. But before she could question him, the security chief received confirmation that Chicago police were already on their way. Ethan did not protest. He simply asked for one thing. Can I make a phone call? 10 minutes later, the lobby had grown colder with the rain pressing against the glass. 2 officers stood near Ethan while Claire reviewed the preliminary security report. There had been no forced entry, no damaged equipment, no missing data. Still, he had crossed into a restricted zone. Mr. Walker, one officer said, we need you to come with us while they sort this out. Understood. Ethan reached slowly for his phone. My daughter is waiting for me. I promised I'd pick her up before 9. The officer nodded. Make it quick. Ethan called. Sophie answered before the second ring. Daddy. Her voice was small enough that Claire tried not to listen, but the empty lobby carried every word. Hey, sweetheart. Ethan's entire tone changed. The guarded stranger disappeared, replaced by a tired father trying to keep worry out of his voice. I'm going to be late. How late? I don't know yet. Mrs. Alvarez is going to let you stay over a little longer. Are you okay? Ethan looked toward the rain. I am okay. There was a pause. Daddy, did you do something bad? Claire's eyes lifted from the report. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. No, sweetheart. Then why can't you come home? Because sometimes telling the truth takes a little longer. Sophie was quiet. Mom used to say that. Ethan swallowed. Yeah, she did. I saved you some pizza. A faint smile touched his face. Then I definitely have to come home. He ended the call and handed his phone over without complaint. Claire looked away first. The officers escorted him toward the revolving doors. Ethan stopped once and turned back. When your engineers inspect the north room, Tell them to check the temperature sensor behind rack 14. Not the software reading. The physical sensor. Claire frowned. How do you know where it is? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Because moving it 6 inches was considered too expensive when the system was installed. Before Claire could ask what that meant, he was gone. Near midnight, the same alarms that had interrupted his departure finally brought Claire back downstairs. Engineering had completed its emergency inspection. The chief engineer approached her holding a tablet, his face unsettled. He was right. Claire said nothing. Rack 14. Failed sensor. The software showed normal temperature, but the physical reading was 23 degrees higher. Walker's manual isolation prevented the backup circuit from taking the full load. Could he have caused the failure himself? No. The degradation started months ago. Claire stared through the rain-darkened glass where Ethan had disappeared hours earlier. Then how did he know? The engineer hesitated. That's what I can't explain. He enlarged an archived schematic on his tablet. I checked the original infrastructure drawings from 15 years ago. Almost nobody has access to these anymore. Claire leaned closer. In the bottom corner was a faded approval box containing 3 signatures. One belonged to her father, Richard Whitmore. Another belonged to a retired engineer Claire recognized. The third had been partially corrupted during an old database migration, leaving only 2 readable initials. E.W. Claire's expression went still. Find the original. The engineer nodded. Claire looked toward the lobby doors, suddenly remembering the manila envelope Ethan had carried all evening. For the first time, the question was no longer how Ethan Walker knew her building. It was why a man who knew its oldest secrets had walked into it carrying a letter for her board. By 7:15 the next morning, Claire Whitmore had already read the overnight engineering report 3 times. Each reading made the same conclusion harder to dismiss. Ethan Walker had not damaged the North infrastructure system. He had prevented a cascading shutdown that could have taken critical operations offline for hours and cost the company millions. More troubling was the precision of what he knew. Rack 14, the physical temperature sensor, the obsolete relay sequence, even the 6-inch placement decision buried in specifications older than half the executives now working at Whitmore Dynamics. Claire stood beside the conference room windows as gray morning light spread across Chicago. Run his background again, she told her chief of staff, Nathan Cole. We already did. Do it differently. Nathan turned his laptop toward her. Ethan James Walker, 41, widower. 1 daughter, Sophie, age 9. Current employment is facilities maintenance for a commercial property company on the south side. Before that, contract electrical work, building systems, some independent consulting. Claire looked at him. And 15 years ago. Nathan hesitated. That's where it gets strange. He scrolled backward. There's almost nothing reliable between 2008 and 2012. Tax records show income, but several employer references are attached to entities that were later absorbed into other companies. Including ours? Possibly. Claire's eyes narrowed. Possibly isn't an answer. The archives from that period are incomplete. The door opened, and Chief Engineer Marcus Bell entered carrying a printed schematic. I found something. He placed it on the table. The paper was yellowed at the edges, an original copy pulled from off-site storage rather than the digital archive. Claire leaned closer. At the bottom were 3 approval signatures. Richard Whitmore, Harold Benton, and beneath them, written clearly in black ink, Ethan Walker. Claire stared at the name. That could be another Ethan Walker. Marcus shook his head. I thought so too. He placed a second document beside it. Same initials. Same signature. Same project. What project? North Star. Claire stopped breathing for a beat. North Star was almost mythology inside Whitmore Dynamics, the infrastructure architecture that had allowed her father's struggling company to scale into a national technology powerhouse. Employees knew the name. Very few knew who had actually built it. My father designed North Star. Marcus chose his words carefully. Your father led the company. That isn't what I said. Silence settled over the table. Nathan glanced between them. Claire's phone vibrated, but she ignored it. Where's Walker now? Released early this morning, pending review, Nathan said. The company still has to decide whether to pursue the trespassing complaint. Claire looked at him sharply. We're not pursuing anything until I understand this. For the first time since ordering Ethan removed, uncertainty entered her voice. Marcus opened another archive file. There's more. Walker's technical credentials from that period are unusually advanced. Systems engineering, electrical architecture, thermal redundancy. He wasn't maintenance staff. Then what was he? Marcus looked at the signature again. Someone important enough to approve design changes beside your father. Claire remembered Ethan saying, apparently, it isn't anymore. The words felt different now. She returned downstairs to the lobby, hoping security footage might reveal what he had done before entering the restricted corridor. Instead, the receptionist approached, holding something. Ms. Whitmore, we found this beside the security desk after the police left. The old manila envelope. Claire took it slowly. On the front, written by hand, were the words for Daniel Mercer. Personal. Inside was a sealed letter in a woman's handwriting and a faded Whitmore Dynamics document dated 16 years earlier. Claire read the project name first. North Star. Then she saw the line beneath it. Original architecture team. 3 names followed. Richard Whitmore. Harold Benton. Ethan Walker. Claire stared at the final name until the lobby seemed to disappear around her. The man she had treated like an intruder had not somehow learned the secrets of Whitmore Dynamics. He had helped create them. Claire did not open the sealed letter. Whatever Ethan's late wife had written, it had been addressed to Daniel Mercer, and Claire had already made enough decisions about Ethan Walker without his permission. Instead, she called Mercer and asked him to come to the office immediately. He arrived 40 minutes later, silver-haired and unusually quiet when he saw the envelope. Where did you get this? He asked. Ethan Walker brought it last night. Daniel's eyes lifted sharply. Ethan was here? You know him? Daniel did not answer immediately. Claire felt the silence becoming an accusation. Daniel, where is he now? Home, presumably. Why? Claire folded her arms. Because I had him arrested for entering the North Infrastructure Corridor without authorization. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. You did what? Claire explained the failed sensor, Ethan's intervention, the police, and the documents they had discovered. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked older than he had an hour earlier. Call him. Ethan answered on the 4th ring. His voice sounded exhausted. Walker. Mr. Walker, this is Claire Whitmore. A pause. I know. I found your envelope. It belongs to Daniel. He's here. Another silence. Then Daniel stepped closer. Ethan, it's me. For the first time, Ethan's voice changed. Dan, come in. I don't think your CEO wants me in her building. Claire absorbed that quietly. Mr. Walker, she said, I'm asking you to come. Ethan arrived shortly before 10, wearing the same jacket from the night before. Claire noticed the fatigue beneath his eyes and wondered whether he had slept at all. Daniel met him at the conference room door. Neither man shook hands. They simply looked at each other with the strange familiarity of people separated by too many years. Daniel held up the envelope. Emily wrote this? Ethan nodded. Before she died. Daniel carefully opened the letter. He read in silence. Halfway through, his eyes filled with tears. Claire turned toward the window, granting him the privacy she should have granted Ethan the night before. Finally, Daniel folded the pages. She wanted me to convince you to come back. She wanted Sophie to know I had a life before hospitals and bills. You had more than a life here, Daniel said. You had a future. Ethan gave a tired smile. My future needed me a home. Claire placed the North Star document on the table. Were you part of the original architecture team? Ethan looked at it. Yes. My father always said North Star saved this company. It did. Then why is your name missing from our corporate history? Ethan's gaze settled on the faded signature. Because I asked for it to disappear. Claire stared at him. Ethan explained that when Emily became seriously ill, he walked away from Whitmore Dynamics. There were treatment appointments, insurance fights, nights spent beside hospital windows, and eventually a little girl who needed one parent to choose her over everything else. Richard Whitmore had offered Ethan a senior position, deferred compensation, and an equity package that could someday be worth millions. Ethan declined the position and left the equity untouched. You gave up millions? Claire asked. I gave up meetings, Ethan replied. There's a difference. Why never come back? Because after Emily died, Sophie needed a father more than I needed recognition. Daniel looked down at the letter. Then why now? Ethan's eyes moved to the envelope. Emily made me promise that when Sophie turned 9, I'd finally settle what I left unfinished. Claire glanced at Daniel. What exactly is unfinished? Daniel reached into the envelope and removed one final document Claire had not noticed. His expression changed as he read the first page. Claire, he said quietly, this isn't just about Ethan's history. He placed the document on the table between them. Across the top was an old Whitmore Dynamics equity agreement bearing Richard Whitmore's signature. Ethan Walker had never claimed his shares, but he had never surrendered them either. The equity agreement remained on the conference table between them like something pulled from another lifetime. Claire read the first page twice, then a third time, but the language did not change. Ethan Walker had been granted an early ownership interest in Whitmore Dynamics as part of the North Star Development Agreement. The shares had never been exercised, sold, or formally surrendered. This can't still be valid, Claire said. Daniel Mercer looked at her carefully. That isn't the important question. It is when we're talking about ownership. Ethan remained seated, hands loosely folded. I didn't come here to take your company, Claire. It was the first time he had used her first name. Somehow, without anger, it carried more weight than anything he had said the night before. Then why bring this? She asked. Because Emily wanted Sophie to know the truth about what her father helped build. Daniel leaned back. And because Richard made promises. Claire looked toward him. My father, promises that were never properly documented in the corporate history. Before Daniel could explain further, the conference room doors opened. 3 board members entered, followed by Whitmore Dynamics General Counsel. Nathan had informed them that an old equity claim had surfaced, and curiosity had apparently moved faster than discretion. Gregory Hale, the board's longest-serving finance director, picked up the agreement. His mouth tightened as he read Ethan's name. This is what brought everyone running. Claire's expression cooled. Gregory, not now. No, I like to understand. Gregory looked across the table at Ethan. Yesterday, this man was wandering through a restricted area. Today, he's presenting a 16-year-old document suggesting he owns part of the company. I didn't suggest anything, Ethan said. The document speaks for itself. Gregory gave a short laugh. Convenient. Daniel's chair moved slightly. Watch yourself. I'm protecting shareholders. Gregory placed the agreement down. We have a maintenance man with a convenient story, an obsolete contract, and apparently enough technical knowledge to make his trespassing look heroic. The room went quiet. Claire watched Ethan, expecting some flash of anger. None came. I work maintenance, Ethan said. There's dignity in that. Gregory shrugged. But it doesn't make you a founder. I never called myself one. Then prove whatever it is you're claiming. Ethan looked at Claire. She could have ended the meeting there. Instead, uncertainty held her silent. Ethan noticed. That seemed to disappoint him more than Gregory's insult. He stood and gathered Emily's letter. Last night you decided what I was by looking at my jacket. This morning your board is doing the same thing with my paycheck. Gregory started to respond, but Ethan continued. That's your choice. I don't need this room to believe me. Claire stood. Ethan, wait. He paused. There has to be a way to verify what happened. There is. Records. Better. Ethan reached for the notepad beside Daniel, wrote 10 digits, tore off the page, and slid it across the polished table toward Claire. Gregory glanced at it. What is that? A phone number. Whose? Ethan met Claire's eyes. Someone your board won't call a liar. Daniel saw the number and immediately went still. Claire noticed. You recognize it? Daniel nodded once. Claire, maybe we should do this privately. Ethan shook his head. No, they wanted proof. Let them hear it. Claire picked up the paper. Who am I calling? Ethan pulled on his worn jacket. His voice remained quiet. Ask him who designed North Star. Ask him why my name disappeared. And ask him what I gave up when I walked away. Claire looked at the number again. Daniel whispered the answer before she could dial. It's Richard's private line. Every board member stopped moving. Ethan walked toward the door, then turned back. "Put your father on speaker." Claire stared at the handwritten number for several seconds before placing her phone in the center of the conference table. No one spoke. Gregory Hale's confidence had faded into a guarded expression, while Daniel Mercer sat perfectly still, as though he already knew what was coming. Ethan remained near the door, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair. Claire entered the number. "You're certain?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Speaker." The first ring sounded unusually loud in the boardroom. Then a second. On the third, an older man answered. "Richard Whitmore." Claire straightened instinctively. "Dad, it's Claire." "Claire, is everything all right? I need to ask you about someone." Ethan lowered his eyes. Claire continued. "Ethan Walker." Nothing came from the phone. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Claire glanced at Daniel. "Dad." Richard finally spoke, but the warmth had disappeared from his voice. "Where did you hear that name?" "He's sitting in my boardroom." Another silence. "Ethan is there?" "Yes." Richard exhaled slowly. "Put me on speaker." "You already are." Claire looked around the table. "Yesterday, Ethan entered the North Infrastructure Corridor without authorization. I believe he was trespassing, so I had him arrested." The line went completely quiet. Gregory shifted in his chair. Richard's next words came slowly. "You had Ethan Walker arrested?" Claire swallowed. "Yes." "Claire, you arrested the man who saved this company before you were old enough to run it." No one moved. Even the faint ventilation above them suddenly seemed loud. Claire looked at Ethan, but he showed no satisfaction. Richard continued. "North Star was failing before launch. We had money tied up in contracts, investors losing patience, and a system that couldn't scale safely. Ethan found a flaw everyone else missed. Then he rebuilt the architecture with Harold and me." Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "Why isn't that in our history?" "Because Ethan asked me to remove his name from public materials when Emily got sick. Reporters had started calling. Competitors were offering him jobs. He wanted none of it." Gregory leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Whitmore, with respect, we have an equity agreement that appears never to have been exercised." "Appears," Richard repeated. "Gregory, I signed it." Gregory's face changed. "So the shares are legitimate?" "Every one of them." Claire stared at Ethan. Richard continued. "I offered him money, executive authority, and enough equity to make him wealthy before 30. Do you know what he asked me for instead?" Nobody answered. Time. Time to drive Emily to treatment. Time to raise his daughter. Time that money couldn't buy back. Ethan looked toward the Chicago skyline. Richard's voice softened. "When Emily died, I called him. He never returned because Sophie needed him. But those shares were never canceled. I made certain of that." Claire's composure finally cracked. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't my story to tell." Then Richard paused. "But if Ethan came back now, there's a reason." Daniel unfolded Emily's letter. "There is." Richard seemed to understand without explanation. "Then listen to him." Claire looked across the table at the man she had judged by worn boots and a visitor badge. Gregory could no longer meet Ethan's eyes. The other board members sat motionless. No objections. No dismissive smiles. No whisper questions. Just silence. Ethan finally walked back to the table. "Richard, I didn't make that call to embarrass anyone." "I know. I only wanted the truth established." "It is now." Ethan nodded. Claire lowered her gaze. "Ethan, I owe you an apology. You owe your company something more useful than that." She looked up. "What?" Ethan glanced around the silent boardroom. "A decision about what kind of people deserve respect before you know their resume." Richard spoke one final time. "Claire, there's one more thing you need to understand. Ethan's original equity doesn't merely make him a former engineer." Claire's eyes returned to the agreement. "What does it make him?" Richard answered quietly. "One of the largest individual shareholders still connected to Whitmore Dynamics." This time, the boardroom did not simply become quiet. It became absolutely still. The silence lasted until Richard Whitmore finally spoke. Through the phone. "I think you know what comes next, Claire." Claire looked across the table at Ethan. Less than 24 hours earlier, She had seen worn boots, a visitor badge, and a man standing where she believed he did not belong. Now every assumption she had made seemed smaller than the quiet dignity with which he had endured them. "I do," she said. By noon, Whitmore Dynamics had formally withdrawn its trespassing complaint. Claire personally contacted the police department to clarify that Ethan had entered the restricted corridor because he recognized an infrastructure emergency and had prevented a major system failure. But paperwork was easy. Accountability was harder. Claire called the board back into session and placed Ethan's original equity agreement beside the North Star documents. "His ownership will be restored and recognized in full," she said. "Gregori hale shiftet unjon fortabi." "Claire, we should have counsel calculate the implications before making promises." "Counsel can calculate numbers," she replied. "They don't calculate integrity." Ethan raised a hand. "I'm not asking for anyone to lose their position." Gregory looked surprised. "After what happened?" "Especially after what happened." Ethan stood slowly. "If humiliation becomes the price of correcting humiliation, nobody learns anything." Claire studied him. "Then what do you want?" Ethan glanced through the glass wall toward the lobby below. Maintenance workers crossed the marble floor while executives moved past them without looking up. "Change the policy." "Which policy?" "The one that isn't written down." Claire understood. Ethan continued. "The assumption that a uniform tells you someone's value. That an expensive suit deserves patience, but work boots deserve suspicion. Yesterday, I was useful before you knew my résumé. I was telling the truth before you knew my shares existed." Nobody interrupted him. Respect shouldn't arrive after verification. 3 months later, Whitmore Dynamics introduced a company-wide dignity and access policy requiring concerns from contractors, maintenance personnel, visitors, and hourly employees to receive documented review instead of automatic dismissal based on status. Ethan accepted recognition of his equity, but declined an executive office. He agreed instead to serve as an independent infrastructure advisor 2 days each month. The rest of his time still belonged to Sophie. On his first official day back, Ethan brought her to headquarters. Sophie walked beside him through the same lobby where he had once stood under suspicion, her small hand wrapped around his. Claire came downstairs to meet them. Sophie studied her with a fearless curiosity only a 9-year-old could manage. "Are you the lady who arrested my dad?" Claire stopped. Ethan almost smiled. "Sophie, it's okay," Claire said. She crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. "Yes, I'm the lady who made that mistake." Sophie considered this. "Daddy says people can fix mistakes." Claire looked up at Ethan. "Your dad taught me that too." Sophie nodded as if the matter were settled. "Good." Then she reached in her backpack and handed Claire a folded drawing. It showed 3 people standing beside a tall glass building beneath an enormous yellow sun. Claire smiled. "Who's this?" "Daddy, me, and you." "Why am I in it?" Sophie shrugged. "Because Daddy says second chances only work if somebody gives you one." Claire's eyes filled, but Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. Months later, a framed copy of Sophie's drawing hung outside the boardroom beside the original North Star schematic. Beneath them was a small plaque containing no titles, stock values, or corporate achievements. Only one sentence Ethan had agreed to let Claire use. "Respect people before you discover why they deserve it." And whenever Claire passed that wall, she remembered the night she had mistaken quietness for weakness and status for character. Ethan Walker never needed revenge. He never needed applause. He had something stronger than either. He had dignity when nobody recognized him, grace when recognition finally came, and the wisdom to understand that true justice was not making a room fear your power. It was leaving that room better than you found it.